session will be recorded and will be available later. So Lyle, your impression and your capability and your depth of knowledge will be available to everybody for posterity. Sorry, as I was saying in introducing Lyle, Lyle's an extensive background in terms of a number of industries, having worked in the medical side of the world, as well as consulting side of the world, as well as retail, and now in the financial services sector. So a world of experience in terms of dealing with data and the use of data, as well as having shared a number of insights in the technical space through IT Web and other speaking engagements. So Lyle is eminently qualified today to represent DVT here in our insight sessions. These sessions are typically set up and geared to provide you the awareness of opportunities to use technology, and then share some insights as to how that is of value and how you might realize that value for yourself and for organizations that you work for. Lyle, I will leave it open to you at this point in time. For our audience, just be aware that Lyle's little session here will run probably about 45 minutes, and then we will have 15 minutes available for Q&A. If at that point in time, please, you could raise your questions through the chat window. I will then pick those up, moderate those, and share those with Lyle, and we'll get an answer through to you. And with that, Lyle, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights in terms of data storytelling. We really appreciate you making the time available to share that today. So over to you, Lyle.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. You know, a presenter is nothing without an audience. And as you know, I'm going to be talking about data storytelling, the data skill for everyone. And when I say everyone, it is for everyone. That's for each and every one of you. So I'll be giving you tangible frameworks that you can be using in your daily lives, and you can apply it in your workplace. These are frameworks that I've used on BI projects and that I've shared with clients. They're also frameworks that are used in BI tools, and they are implemented as part of the emerging best practice of data storytelling. So in the spirit of data storytelling, I'm going to delve into a story. It's a bit of a tragedy, but these are some of the stories where we learn our best moral lessons. So I'm taking you back to 1986, and this is, some of you may know this event, some of you may have witnessed it and experienced it, and it was the 10th launch of the Challenger shuttle in August 1986. And this was a momentous event for the 20th century. What happened was that 73 seconds after liftoff, the Challenger shuttle exploded. And this was witnessed on live television. It was a tragic event which struck an emotional chord with millions worldwide. 7 astronauts lost their lives, one who would have been the first female civilian in space. So it was an emotional event. And the event was actually caused by an O-ring. So this O-ring is a component that connects the rocket boosters. And on the day, it was a particularly cold day, 29 degrees Fahrenheit. You can think of it as 2 degrees Celsius. And this led to the O-rings deteriorating. And it led to a chain of events that caused that explosion and the vaporizing of the Challenger shuttle. Now, what is significant is there's a story within a story. And this story is about the project engineers. These project engineers were aware of the risks of the flight. They were aware of the risks of the launch. They had run sample tests and they've seen the O-rings. They witnessed the damage at low temperature. And as part of risk management, they raised this to their project leaders. So you can imagine these project engineers, these bright MIT minds, NASA's brightest minds, using those old overhead projectors with the plastic slides, showing this graphic that we see here, these crayon-like drawings. It's very confusing. The temperatures depicted. They're trying to showcase the damage. It made sense to the engineers, but when they show the project leaders and when they try to convince the executives, it's not surprising that they were not convinced to pull the plug on the projects due to the risks of the O-ring damage. What should the engineers have done? They had their data, they had their test scenarios, they knew the O-rings were a problem. They knew that low temperature would have caused the flight risk. Now, if they had framed the question properly, they knew the relationship between temperature and O-ring damage. They knew that low temperature caused O-ring damage in the test they had run. If they had plotted those data points, framed the question properly, depicted the relationship between temperature and damage, maybe it could have been different. Many people think that choosing the right chart or choosing the correct design or visualization is a design problem. They think it's a creative endeavor, but it's actually many times a logical problem. People don't frame their question properly. If they had framed their hypothesis, their chart would have manifested, and they would have known that to show relationships between variables, you use a scatter plot. On one axis, the x-axis, you show your temperature. On another axis, the y-axis, you show the damage. And you plotted data points showing these relationships. And if you extrapolated a trend line, it's obvious to see that at low temperatures, there's a significant amount of O-ring damage. And you can even narrate and provide additional information to provide context. So using data points, using the correct chart, using narrative, these are elements of data storytelling. They're the difference between project success and failure. They are the difference between recognizing problems, recognizing opportunities. And it's the difference in our organizations. We have bright minds, we have bright individuals. And if they do not frame their questions properly, insights won't be compelling and we won't make a difference within our organizations. So it's not surprising that this is developing as an emerging skill. In the United States, you're seeing the job role of the data storyteller developing in our modern world. This person weaves data, weaves visuals, weaves narratives, and compels an audience. It's an emerging skill, and we're going to explore the mindset of the skill. The frameworks I'll apply, you can use in the boardroom, where you can narrate over visuals in front of an audience. You can use it in a pause area setting, talking amongst your colleagues, opening your laptop, having a discussion. We can use it within your visualization itself, a chart as well narrated with text, where the user can explore and delve into the insights. So the framework is pretty flexible. We'll explore data, how to mold your data, how to make it business friendly, and how to make it consumable for charts. We'll explore visuals, techniques used by brands, techniques used by marketers to provide focus on insights in visuals and to lead to speed to perception or speed to insight. It's focus, it's visuals with focus. And then we're going to look at narratives. Narrative, the story, the glue for the insights, how we take those charts, how we frame them together, how we lead that audience to the call to action, and how we build rapport using a good story and a good framework. So these are the elements that we will explore. So people always ask me, knowing these frameworks, why is data storytelling important? And it's probably a question that you have. Some people say, data storytelling is all about pretty pictures, something we worry about at the end of the data exercise. But as we've seen, sometimes having compelling insights, framing your insights properly, and performing data storytelling, it's an obligation. Sometimes it's a responsibility. We have to showcase risks. We have to showcase insights that have an impact on the business. And we have a responsibility to be unbiased and truthful in the way that we represent these insights. So it's not surprising that Gartner, a major consulting and major market research and consulting firm, has said that by 2025, data stories will be the most widespread way of consuming analytics. And we already see it there. We see tools automated to assist us in storytelling. We see tools helping us to frame the story and lead the audience to a call to action. But each one of us, we experience what we call a data deluge. We're surrounded by data. We use so many applications. We use so many data sources. We're bombarded by data constantly. And this data hits us in large volumes. It hits us at a rapid pace. And it challenges us in creating insights and creating the insights at a rapid pace to meet the needs of our business or meet the needs of our daily lives. So this is the challenge of the data deluge. We're also surrounded by stories. It's a way brands talk to us. It's a way marketers talk to us. It's a way that Netflix series you've been watching. It's a way it speaks to you and appeals to you. It's also the way we interact with a complex world around us. So it's not surprising that stories are used now to communicate with data. It's used as a way for people to make sense of the complex world of data. So then what is this data storytelling? What does it entail? If you don't gather anything today, just remember this framework. Remember the combination of narrative, visuals, and data. The three elements of data storytelling, the three elements you'll mold and weave to compel your audience. Data, gathering the data to support your hypothesis, to support your questions, and to support your visuals. Creating those visuals to highlight the logic in your data and to bring form and function. And narrative, the glue to engage with your stakeholders, the glue to tie those visuals together and bring context for data and bring understanding. So those three things, they work together as part of the exercise of data storytelling. So what are the prerequisites? What do you need before you tell your story? All of us, we work with stakeholders, we work with various personality types, we work with various personas. And personas help define how our data story will manifest. You may work with an executive. This person wants high-level information. They want to see the bottom line. They want to see trends, high-level problems, opportunities. They may not be interested in the lower-level details. Then you have amiables, people very chatty, friendly. You may engage more with them. You may focus more on your story and compelling the audience and keeping them close, keeping them interested in the data and the insights. And then you have analysts. These guys want to dig down. These guys want to drill into the data. They want to understand how you came up with your hypotheses. You may have a separate tab for them, explaining the insights, explaining how you came to your conclusion. So it's always important to remember your personas. They will help your story manifest and they will define how your questions are asked. Once you have your personas, another prerequisite is actually asking the questions. When we looked at the Challenger shuttle example, they framed the question, or they had to frame the question properly. And there's a framework we use to ask questions. It's the framework we use to frame questions. And it's something journalists use, something we business analysts use, something called the 5 W's and 2 H's. What, where, who, why, and when, and the how and how much. So you can think of a journalist trying to frame their story, asking questions, and finding something juicy in the story they want to depict. You can think of maybe a sales manager trying to think of the questions he may want in a dashboard or in his data story. Who are his best customers? Where are the best stores? How much sales are we making? In which year are we making sales? When is it occurring? So various questions are asked. And these questions help your story and your data visualization to manifest. And as we ask questions, as your story manifests, we may refine and find further questions that we may ask. Once we have the questions that we ask, and once we have framed those questions, we find the data to support the questions we have. Now, I see there are many developers here in this audience and many engineering-minded individuals, and this may be appealing to them, the art of actually acquiring data and transforming it for the purpose of data storytelling. So as we've mentioned, we interact with many data sources. We interact with online repositories, we interact with flat files, and we interact with sources that we need to answer the questions that we have. And a typical process that takes place is extract, transform, load, or extract, load, and transform. So the important thing to note is that we extract information. So we extract all the data required for our story, and then we transform it into a way that it makes sense for our story. And by transforming it, we may add business rules, we may enrich it to make it business friendly in the way that it speaks, and we may enrich it with business additional information and additional context, so that we have all the information we need for the story. We may also remove stuff we do not need, so that our visualizations are not cluttered and confusing for the end user. So to show you an example of data acquisition, I'm just going to walk through the Enron scandal and this data story and how we can acquire data and build a data visualization and story out of this scandal. So this story takes place in 2001. So this Enron was the darling of Wall Street, a major energy company that committed accounting scandals and fraudulent practices, and their share price dropped overnight. So the company plummeted. Various individuals were complicit: Kenneth Lay, the CEO, and Jeff Skilling, the consultant from McKinsey. So it was a significant event in the United States, one of the greatest scandals, and quite a juicy story at the time. But what we can do is we have access to their emails. We have access to their email corpus, which you can download online. So this includes all the communication up to that point in time. So we can play with this data. I downloaded it, can build a social network, look at all the senders and recipients, and you can look at patterns and relationships and see patterns of communication. So you can delve into it and maybe look at people that may have been complicit, people that may have sensitive information, people that are likely to be influential in the organization. And what I've done is taken that information, just transferred it into a data set, so we can see the senders on the left, you can see the recipients at the top, and we create this data corpus showing the amounts of transactions between the individuals. Volumes of transactions may depict influence of individuals, and they may depict people who have significant ability to hold and gatekeep important information. So you see a lot of zeros here. Obviously, in organization, there are many people that you do not interact with. But this data is still clunky. It's still difficult to consume. So then what you do is you pivot the information. Just a simple transformation. So I've extracted the data. Now I'm transforming it into a simple way, into a simple means that our visualization can consume. So it's just 3 columns: sender, receiver, and value. And the value is the total amount of transactions between the sender and receivers. And I can remove those with lower or less significant transactions so that the data visualization is much cleaner and much more representable. And then what happens is we create the visualization itself. And based on the type of questions that we want to ask, a core chart's relevant. So this is a circular visualization, something that depicts relationships between individuals. And since we want to see relationships between senders and receivers, and we want to see volumes of transactions, this becomes a very useful tool. So we can see, for instance, Richard Shapiro, he's got large volumes of transaction depicted by the size of the lines. And through the line connections, we can see individuals he sent information to. So lines are a way of connecting individuals. Colors show different stakeholders. And size is depicted by or volumes depicted by the size of the lines. These are all design elements, which I'll walk into a bit later. But what we can see here, we can see certain patterns. So Richard Shapiro, thick lines. He's a vice president. He's a lobbyist, so he's got significant influence. Similarly with James Stephens, Richard Sanders, Jeff Dasovich, these are executives that have government relationships, vice presidents and senior managers. So they have strong relationships with the government. Through the volumes of the emails, you can see they are pretty influential in the company. Then I see certain individuals here at the bottom. We see have emails springing out to them like a water fountain. Tana Jones, Mark Taylor, and some others here. And these are gatekeepers of information. They are legal advisors, legal executives. They have a lot of relationships with other stakeholders in the organization. So they're chatting, communicating, going back and forth. These may be the type of people that may keep information and be significant gatekeepers in the organization. So I'm using the visual design and the chart to bring form to our insights. And I'm highlighting and narrating those insights to you. So these are all elements of data storytelling. So we've walked a bit into acquiring data, transforming it into a chart, and consuming that chart and displaying it to an audience. And now I want to talk a bit about creating an information flow. So daily, when we do insights, when you work on when you are creating dashboards, for instance, most of the insights are probably not as juicy or as exciting as the example we've shown here. But there's a technique or framework we use for everyday insights, which we call an information flow. It's a way for us to frame our questions. It's a way for us to drill down an information hierarchy and drill down insights and to create a dashboard, for instance. And this is a common thing you may use in your work environment. And this is used in many BI tools as well. So it starts with the information flow starts with a high-level view. So it's an overview first. And in the overview, we look at high-level trends, the problems, the opportunities, the sales trends, the key KPIs. And then what happens is we zoom and filter, we drill down, we find outliers or interesting information we want to investigate. So this may be your top categories, your core proportions, or maybe just some insights you find interesting. So you're filtering, you're slicing, you're zooming until you get some detailed information you've drilled down to. And this detail is an actionable list, a list that you can action on. So if I think about that sales manager example, you may have high-level trends. You may look at sales trends on a high level. You might be interested in that, but then you may want to investigate significant increases of sales and look at products that are influencing this trend. So he zooms and filters into well-performing products, well-performing customers, and then he may build, as a detail on demand, a customer list that is actionable and that we can deliver or that we can action on to actually make a change and provide some return on investment. So details on demand is actually actionable. So I'm going to show you this in actually working in a dashboard itself. So this is what a sales manager typically would see. So you'll have his high-level trends, which you can see here at the top. So this just gives him a high-level overview. You can see the trends. I just scraped this data quickly from the web to show you. So 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, we can see a sales trends increasing. And you may want to delve into a particular year, like 2014, and investigate this trend. So he has a high level. He sees something interesting. He sees an outlier. So now he's going to drill down, zoom and filter on products that may be leading to an increase in sales. So now I'm going to this chart, sales by product name. I'm going to expand it. This is snapshotting. I'm going to look at the insights. I can see advanced copiers are performing well, leather armchairs when compared to all the years in total and the proportions. My visual eye can see the decrease in smartphones and the big brands. And I can see these insights in this frame. And I can take external context and I can maybe say, I know that this particular year is a year where low-cost smartphones have penetrated the market, and that's maybe why it's impacting smartphone sales. So I may want to focus on office equipment as I see here. So that's an insight. I may look at certain customers and build an actionable customer list at the bottom. So I'm going from a high level and I'm zooming and filtering and going to the details on demand. And I have something actionable in a list that we can follow up on and prevent customer attrition and improve sales. So this is how you use that framework in practice. Another benefit of the framework is that we may have day-to-day insights, but these insights are now storytelling friendly. If you think about a typical story structure, here we see this Calvin and Hobbes comic. A story follows this structure basically. If you think about the first frame, we have a setup and we see Calvin running. We introduce to our hero, the superhero, Calvin, and he's going up, up and away. And then here's the rising action. This boy is flying, there's something happening. And then there's a climax, boom, he crashes. So this is the aha moment. You know, that point where we see, okay, we have this realization and the resolution comes naturally to us. He's maybe not the Superman he thought he was, and he's realizing this. So the audience absorbs the story or the conclusion of the story in the resolution. But this can apply in our data story as well. Even when using the dashboard, you think about that high level you created, that can be your setup, setting up your scene, introducing your stakeholder, introducing them to the problems and opportunity. This is how you can use a story in your daily insights or in your daily practice when creating a dashboard. And then as you slice and dice, zoom and filter, highlight insights, go from one, go to the next. We're doing the rising action. We're building up that tension. You can build tension from the insights you see. You can even bring in external context, external information, and make it interesting for the audience. And then we have the climax. And our climax was the realization that maybe you must focus on office equipment, maybe you must expand and follow up on these customers and build that customer base. So we're linking the insights to our conclusion. That's our aha moment, and the resolution is there. We have that detailed list. The sales manager knows exactly that's the call to action. That's a list to follow up on. These are the customers to concentrate on. So that's how you can take your mundane insights and make it actionable in your day-to-day practice. A very simple framework. It applies in most of the tools that you will use. But now talk about creating the visuals. I see there's some UI experts here. I see there are many developers who actually want to understand a bit of design and want to understand how they can use design frameworks. And, you know, the dashboard, I walked through the dashboard that I showed you. It's full of charts. Charts, fill up your dashboard. Charts, build up our elements or frames for your story. They're kind of like the frames that we walked through in that Calvin and Hobbes comic. And charts fall in these core categories: comparison, composition, distribution, and relationship. So comparison, if you have questions where you're comparing one variable to the next, for instance, one last year to this year, and you want to list it in a column chart, we can do a line chart and compare line charts. Those are the types of charts you use with comparison charts. And then we have composition. Think about your pie chart. Think about how you showcase parts to whole. And you may do this over time. You may have stacked columns that you frame over time, or a tree map you want to drill down into. I'll go a bit more into detail on the use of tree maps. Then is distribution. We have distribution of elements. So a line chart can show the distribution over time. You can use a histogram to show distribution of categories. Some of the project managers here are used to using Pareto charts and breaking down risks into various categories. So that's how we show distributions. And then we have relationships, like we did with the Challenger example, using a scatter plot and showing that trend line. And you can show three variables as well in a bubble plot, where the size of the bubble is the third variable. You have an X and Y axis, and the size of the bubble. I'll showcase that later as well. Now, for the designers, you may be familiar with this, the Gestalt principle. This is your data storytelling Jedi mind trick. This is a thing you'll use for design. And it takes advantage of the fact that each one of us, our brains are pattern matching machine. Our brains, through the evolutionary process, wants to understand the world around it and take shortcuts to perceive things. So we take note of certain things, and what a designer uses, what a data visualizer does, and a data storyteller uses this ability to point the users in the direction he wants them to go. He uses it to highlight certain things. So you may use elements like closure, enclosing objects on the data visualization, proximity, data points that are grouped together, we may perceive it more easily. Continuation, those lines we looked at in the core chart. Similarity, those similar colors that we're looking at. That's a Gestalt principle. And then we have other principles like hierarchy, figure and ground we may use. Orderliness of your elements of your chart. Those are other forms of Gestalt principles we'll walk through. So I think all of you see this dog on the screen, but it's actually not a dog. It's actually a bunch of dots or a bunch of specks, but your mind, your pattern matching mind is framing the dog for you. And the Gestalt magic is at work, and you see a dog moving and walking. So that's how we interact with our world and how our mind makes sense of the world around us. Similarly, in the data visualization, when you're telling a story, you can use colors and proximity to group items together, as you see on the left. And you can use color and enclosure to group items, as you see on the right. So on the right here, I can see good grossing or medium grossing films like Man on Fire and Book of Eli with the middle of the round Rotten Tomato rating. And you can see all of those clustered together very easily. I actually like those films, but you can see the elements and the Gestalt principles at work here. And that's how we use the principles to draw the users to those insights we want to see. Here's a simple static report that you may use, and just a simple enclosure in the form of a rectangle can highlight high-performing sales agents or reps. This is an example of contrast. It's used by brands, it's used by marketers. I can see this apple that's been nicely chewed out of. I can also see the head of Steve Jobs, the legendary Steve Jobs. So we see these distinct elements, and we see that they are made distinct and it's easy for us to perceive. So in our data storytelling world, when you're working with charts, this is bad contrast. It's not easy to perceive, and it's not easy to get insight quickly. And that is good contrast. The white background makes it distinct. And the beauty is a lot of our data visualization tools in this day and age automatically makes the background white and takes note of contrast elements. So insight is very easily perceivable because of the distinct contrast and distinct elements of the background and foreground. This is the famous iPod silhouette ad. And this ad uses multiple elements, contrast, uses hierarchy, uses focus. And through hierarchy, we take note of the woman on the left first because she's at the top. And she's also contrasted from the iPod we see on the bottom left. But that hierarchy makes us feel her experience, her emotions. So we see her on the left first, but then we're drawn to this Apple iPod, which is highlighted for us. So we get the experience, and then we see the cause of the experience, the Apple iPod. And that's use of focus, which is the focal point, which is also a Gestalt principle. And we use that focal point as a means to highlight elements in our chart. So always remember, highlighting is an effective tool for a storyteller to move through chart elements and to highlight the things you want the user to perceive. It's a way we delve from frame to frame, clicking and highlighting, powerful tool. The principle of orderliness. the orderliness we like to see in the world around us and perceive. We like orderliness in our charts too. See the chart on the left. It's a nice sense of orderliness from left to right. It's this continuation and a decreasing trend, not the same on the right. So we see good contrast, good orderliness in the way that the bar charts are arranged from greatest to smallest. And we're immediately drawn to the best performers, Japan and UK. So it increases speed to insight. This is a tree map I created. I like tree maps. It's got form, it's got function. And tree map will show the best sales or the biggest volumes on the top left and the smallest sales on the smallest volumes on the bottom right. And it has a sense of orderliness. We can see the greatest performers at the top, and it sort of goes down to the bottom right in an orderly way to show you who the most important, which items here are the most important, and which are the items are the ones that we have to focus on. So this is a product hierarchy. You can drill down by clicking on various elements in this tree map and drill down to more granular levels of detail. So tree maps are also useful with hierarchies. And this is a tree map used for stock market data. So size is showing the volume of the share or the size of the share, color showing the rate of change. So tree map is countering the complexities of data. It's helping us perceive good performance, but it's also helping us perceive rapid changes. And this is the way a visualization like this helps counter complexities in data. Volume is challenged by the size of the rectangles, and speed at which we get data is showcased by the rates of, or the change in color. So there's multiple benefits through this tree map. And also you can see proximity in use here, grouping certain indexes together and certain industries of shares. So multiple elements of stealth in use and multiple benefits for the tree map. It's a big word, isomorphic correspondence, but it's got significance in our world, in the world of data visualization. So it's that feeling you get when you see a logo. You see McDonald's logo, you might feel excited, or you might get a bit hungry. It's like when I go to Spur, I see the logo, I have those childhood feelings of eating at Spur, I get a bit excited. So we perceive certain things when we see certain brands, and these perceptions are built up over time. So same things with our visualizations. When using red lines on a bar chart, for instance, we easily get the perception that it's risk or targets. That's what you see. And it's also important to take into consideration the perception you may have with your use of colors. So always try and stick, for instance, with your corporate logos, your corporate branding, because there's perception built with that. And it's good to use those things in your visualizations. This is hierarchy at work. We see things from top to bottom. We may also see things from left to right if you use that framework. So remember this in your dashboards, viewing things from top to bottom or left to right. In some cultures, it may be from right to left. Now I'm going to look at creating the narrative. So we've looked at design, we've looked at visuals, we've looked at acquiring data and asking questions. But narrative's the glue that ties everything together. It's a glue that we use to go from insight to insight and connect it for the audience. So narratives, that verbal or spoken messaging. I may speak to you over visualization, or I may apply text in the visualization and narrate through using text and use elements, the Gestalt elements we have worked through to highlight certain insights that we have seen. So it's a verbal spoken messaging, and it's fitted into a story structure with a beginning, middle, and end. And it's also used to draw users to a call to action. What I'm going to work through, the data story I want to work through, is the health and wealth of nations. And we can look at the data story of Hans Rosling. So Hans Rosling is a famous data storyteller. He's basically the godfather of modern data storytelling. And he's the late Hans Rosling. So he believed that within countries, there was a relationship between average income of a country and health and life expectancy. And he wanted to showcase this in a story that was live and was visualization in motion. So over a 200-year span timeline, he walks us through the trends in income of countries and the trends in life expectancy, looking at internal data, but also looking at external socioeconomic factors. And he walks us through different time periods to a conclusion and a call to action and to our modern positive world with good life expectancy and good healthcare. So I'm going to showcase Hans Rosling in action, and we're going to analyze this a bit.
200 years that changed the world. A Gapminder video with Hans Rosling.
It was the last 200 years that changed the world. I will show you in Gapminder world here the situation 1809. Each bubble is a country. The size show the population and the color show the continent. The brown here is West Europe, and you can see from the map for the rest. This axis shows health, life expectancy at birth from 30 years to 80 years. And this axis shows income per person in dollar adjusted for inflation and for purchasing power. 200 years ago, all countries of the world had a life expectancy less than 40 years and had an income less than $3,000. Now I start the world, and you can see that the countries with good statistics, they are jumping up and down. There were famine years, there were better years, and West Europe and North America in industrialization started to grow the economy, but health didn't get much better. And slowly health was getting better. And when we came to a situation about 100 years ago, most of the countries of the world had not improved much. It was only this part of the world that was getting richer and eventually healthier and healthier. And between the First and the Second World War, you can see that the difference between the richest and the poorest in the world is just increasing. It was after the Second World War that most of the countries started to change. The green Arab countries here get richer and richer. China is getting healthier and healthier. Now economic growth starts in China also. And the Arab countries, the green ones, they get healthier. And here we are today. We have a continuous world from high-income countries with long life expectancy to low-income countries with very low life expectancy. But all countries of the world today has more than, or are estimated to have more than 40 years of life expectancy, and all does not have more than $3,000 per capita. So it means that the world has become healthier and richer, but the difference still is enormous between the richest country and the poorest country. And there are also very big differences within countries, which we cannot show here. But
200 years.
So you can see in this data story, our frames in use, but he's doing it in motion. He's actually narrating in real time, and he's using design elements. If you notice there, he used color to showcase different countries. He used enclosure to highlight groups of countries, and he used grouping and proximity to link the countries together. So he's using Gestalt principles, but he's also using the story framework. So in his setup, he introduced us to the countries, introduced us to the axes, health and wealth, and introduced us to the question he wanted to answer and the hypotheses he wanted to prove. So he wanted to prove that income had an effect on life expectancy. And in the setup, he introduces us to a situation where countries have low income and low life expectancy. And that was the past. That is our starting point. And he introduces us to his 200-year time frame. And then he goes through a rising action. He goes through various periods in time. So he's almost going through different time periods in frames, but he's doing this in motion. So his rising action was that 200 years ago, the world was in a pretty bad space. And 100 years ago, things didn't change that much. But then we reach industrialization, and the wealthy countries' life expectancy starts increasing until we get to a point post-World War II where middle-income countries catch up. We see the middle-income countries, China and the Arab countries, gradually improving in healthcare until we get to the world today. A big disparity in life expectancy between the wealthy and the poor countries, but also a world where, on average, life expectancy is much better than it was in the past. So that's a climax. And we can fit that into the storyboarding structure that we have been using. There's the setup, we introduces a timeline, introduces the participants or the countries and the subject matter, and introduces his question. And then he does his rising action, goes through to his climax, and reaches that denouement, the takeaways, which kind of fall into place once we have that conclusion. And what he's depicting is that future where life expectancy, based on those trends, will probably improve, that middle-income countries will catch up with the wealthy countries, and that lower-income countries, they're the ones most at risk, and they're the ones that we have to look at in times of economic turbulence. So there's some key action points that he has as well. So he's weaving all our elements together, the story, the design principles, and the narrative. Data storytelling in motion. So I've walked you through the basic frameworks of storytelling and the frameworks that are used. And if there's nothing, if you have any more questions, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. There's so many frameworks out there, and obviously with narratives and design, the possibilities are endless. So thank you. Thank you for attending my presentation, and thank you for enjoying this world of data storytelling.
Fantastic, Lyle. Lyle, if you don't mind, just stop the share there, and to our audience, if you do have questions for Lyle, please just post them in the chat and I will pick them up from there. I believe our first question really for you, Lyle, we've lost your video for the moment, I think. So okay. If you could, Lyle, just drop the share and then we get to see you.
Okay.
The real question that came from, I am seeing you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Our question from Edgar is probably one that's really relevant, is what makes for a good storyteller? I think you've presented a great framework for folks to start to grasp the concept of what storytelling is and how to do that with data. Clearly, there's a lot that goes into it in the way of experience that's necessary, that you need to build up over time. And there's obviously readings that you can do. But is there something particular about particular people or personas, as you identified them, that makes for a good storyteller?
I think the key thing about storytellers is they are good communicators. And I think they have a passion for data and they have a passion for the insights in data. And I think another thing that people overlook is that it's not only about being a good communicator, it's also about being unbiased and truthful in the way that you communicate. So it's that balance that a good storyteller has to have. You're not just selling a story, you're actually selling something that's truthful. And you're taking the perspectives of subject matter experts, taking the perspectives of things that might have been identified in data, and you are verifying the data sources that you have or the sources of your insights that you have. So there's multiple checks and balances that have to come into place. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. And Lyle, I guess in terms of working in a space where you do regular data storytelling, in Agile and in Scrum approaches, folks always kind of look at things and they'll complete a sprint and then they'll do a retrospective. Is that something that you kind of do post a data storytelling session to look at what you did in order to improve on that? Is that something that works in terms of improving your skills in data storytelling?
Look, as a business analyst and as a data storyteller in general, I try and involve the customer as early in the process as possible. So it wouldn't be that I come to a retrospective and it'll be a surprise to the customer or to the team or to the customer. It's something that's been worked on. It's something that they've expected already. And I think that applies to Agile generally. You try to pre-plan ahead of the time. You try to tie in your team and your customers as early as possible. I don't think there should be any surprises along the way. Yeah.
Okay. And we've got a question from Mary. She's asking, can you talk about the need or role for confidence in communication and relationship building? That's probably a more generic question, but I guess part of that comes down to the preparation that you do before a data storytelling session, knowing what the data is, knowing what the insights are, and then leading folks through the process, sort of the high level, drill down, as you said, the rising and then the climax conclusion, and then leading off to the takeaways, I suppose.
Look, preparation, rehearsal, preparation, that builds confidence. And if you believe in the story, if you believe in the data and the insights that you have, if you have confidence in the sources of your insights, if you've worked with maybe a data scientist who've worked with subject matter experts or stakeholders, and they've given you insights that you followed up on, investigate, and built your stories around, if you have that confidence and you've rehearsed, prepared, you will feel confident when you tell your story. I don't think you have to be this magical storyteller. I think people are happy when you are passionate about what you talk about, and they're engaged when when what you're talking about is interesting and what you're talking about makes sense and provides value to them. They will naturally be engaged in that story. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess one of the challenges in data storytelling these days is also consideration for the access to data. There's the need to protect data privacy. There's legislation out there in the way of POPIA locally within South Africa, GDPR across in the UK. So a lot of the data storytelling has to be done in the context of what's permissible in the way of access to data, and then the use of that data in storytelling. Is that something that you approach consciously in any session that you're leading?
So that ETL diagram I showed, that extract, transform, load, we had our source data and we had the destination. And your destination would usually have POPIA, should have POPIA in place and those principles in place. So you should just ensure that the data warehouse or the data environment that you're working with has elements of data protection in place, so that when you consume data, you know you're not consuming sensitive information. Yeah.
Okay. I guess that's one of the learnings that comes out as almost a data steward that goes alongside your data storytelling.
You have to work with many stakeholders, stewards in the organization, administrators of the environment, managers of data marts, data warehouses, data lakes, and those kind of individuals. Yeah.
Okay. In a more complex data storytelling scenario, Lyle, what are the big challenges that you face in order to get to the insights that you're able to then share in a session like that? Because quite often there's a massive volume of data that starts off the process, and actually getting to those key elements that actually give you the insights is quite tricky. Do you have any particular examples in mind where you've kind of gone, here was a complex scenario that we worked through, and this is how we eventually got to something that was valuable?
Look, the complex scenarios often relate to, you have multiple stakeholders that you work with. So you might get insight from a data scientist, you might present something, but as a data storyteller, you always want to bounce that off with someone else, maybe someone in the business, to see if this makes sense. And it's also, the challenge is meeting that data scientist halfway. So data scientists will come with models, ROC curves, technical jargon, and reason for why his model is well performing, reasons why he believes his insight is correct. So you have to have a basic understanding also of the models and the frameworks that the data scientist uses, especially with verifying the validity of data. So complexity comes in when we're dealing with things based on mathematical models, statistics, and then verifying that with the data scientist, and then verifying that in the business as well, and supporting the data scientist, actually supporting him as an advocate with the business to make sure that they actually take his insights seriously. So challenge, it's more the organizational challenges and more the environment where ideas are bouncing off one person to another and actually championing those insights and taking different perspectives and balancing it against one another. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Lyle. A question from Ganella is, let me just check that one again. How do you ensure that your data story can be easily consumed by all in your intended audience? And I guess that speaks to the challenge of a diverse audience. You might have some personas in that audience that are very numerical in terms of how they look at things, very structured, and want the table type structure in terms of how the data is presented, versus those that are more visually orientated. And I guess that goes back to your challenger story at the start in terms of how do you best present a data-driven story when the audience might have very discrete types of personas in terms of how they might best consume that data.
Look, there's a saying in the art of war, the war is won before the battle is fought. And the challenge is not at the point that you're building that data story and presenting it to the audience. The challenge is you should have known those personas right at the beginning. You should have known the audience you're going to be presenting right at the beginning. You should understand these people and understand the way they want to interact with the story that you have. So if you've done that upfront right at the beginning, you've built your story over time and worked with these guys and answered their questions. And it shouldn't be a surprise at the end of the day that you should have all the elements that cater to them. Yeah.
Right. So it's not just
upfront. Yeah, it's not just you do it on the fly that you do, presenting.
It's not just researching the data and the actual problem statement.
No, it's just understanding the people, what sort of thinkers they are. Analytical, left brain, right brain. Do they like data? Do they like detail? Do they like high level? Are they beginners? The new people? Are they excited about these kind of insights? So that's natural with many professions, I think, as well. Yeah.
So the requirement's really on you as the data storytelling professional to be the data chameleon, really, in terms of how you present and how you convey that message.
Yes, like okay. I know in this audience, for instance, there's developers, UI people, some managers. I've got a framework, and I've got a framework for the type of audience I have. So I have to frame each section and appeal to different people. Yeah.
Okay, we are running out of time for the session today, but let's just pick up another question here from Kevin. Kevin's asking, do you have recommendations for resources for learning tools like Power BI or learning fundamentals, the color theory, mathematics transformations, and some of the showcased examples that you used?
Okay, so you can connect with me, that's one. The second thing is there's some good people to follow, like Hans Rosling. So just write this down, Hans Rosling, David McCandless, Stephen Few, Edward Tuft. These are some industry-leading data storytellers. Some good resources, Power BI. There's a Power BI course and certification where they cover some data elements, so you can do that course online. I think they have a free course also that they delve into data visualization and data design. That's become a very big part of this tool. They even have elements for smart narrations, elements for highlighting. So you can look at the Microsoft resources that are provided, and you can look at that and investigate the principles used there as well.
Fantastic. Lyle, that puts us right at 12 today, which is the end of our session. I just want to thank you so much for making the time available today to present and sharing your insights on data storytelling. To our audience, thank you for joining us. The recording of the session will be posted, so please do follow us on LinkedIn, DVT Software at LinkedIn, and you will see the availability of the post there. We will also send a link to the audience members that registered today. Thank you for joining us. Please do watch out for our next Tech Insight session coming up shortly, an introduction to Power BI that will follow in a week or two's time, and further insight sessions such as the one today with Lyle. Thank you all for joining. And again, Lyle, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank all of you. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.